Hey there, folks. This is Misadventurer here for the fourth developer diary for my Imperator Rome overhaul mod project, Hegemony. Since the third dev diary, I've been hard at work creating new regions and reorganizing territory into new provinces, regions, and tags. Lots of work that's happened here, and a lot more work to go still. We're still in the very early pre-alpha stages of this mod, but I'm very excited to show you what I have here. I feel like a sculptor with a block of marble who can see the statue inside of it with their mind's eye. And as I code and I sort of chip away at the statue in front of me, seeing what I have envisioned kind of come into fruition with my work is just so satisfying. So definitely, I hope that this ends up being a great mod that people like playing, but even if no one plays it, I have had such a great time making this mod just on its own, so definitely an enjoyable experience for me. But anyways, since the third dev diary, I have worked on 3 more regions. The Euboea region, which I worked on before, but I've now updated with my better knowledge of province and region modding, and also the new regions of Aragolis and Laconia in the southeast. So let's take a look at what I have here. As you can see already, there are some new tags organized here. Again, there's still a lot of stuff I haven't worked on yet, so just ignore all this stuff, but everything along the kind of sort of southeast coast of the mainland and also Euboea is updated now. So I'm going to just hop into some random tags so I can show you in the game here what I've got. Let's start by talking about the Euboea region. So this is the island north of the mainland. It is peopled by Ionians, who are historic cultural allies and kind of ethnically connected to Athenae and the Delians. And in fact, in these 5 provinces on the island, which are just in the same locations as the 5 tags, all 5 of the Euboean city-states are historic and reliable Delian members. They're all on Team Athenae. And if you're playing as Athenae or the other Delian League members, these 5 AIs should be expected to stay pretty loyal because of their cultural connections to Athenae. So on Euboea, we've got the strongest city-state, which is Chalkis. They control this crossing over to Boeotia. They're on the front line with the Boeotian enemy at the start of the war. Chalkis also is just the strongest city-state on the island, and they are a powerful potential sort of ally for the Peloponnesians to entice away from the Athenae fold, if you can pull that off somehow. On the island, their neighbor is their ancient rival Eritrea. Now, although these city-states and many other city-states that are in these leagues have these pre-existing rivalries, in those cases and in this case, Chalkis and Eritrea have put aside their rivalry to team up for the Delian League. However, a shrewd Peloponnesian League player could exploit these rivalries and do some political actions to reignite Chalkis-Eritrean conflict, which could basically sort of tie up the resources from Euboea from going to the Delian League as normal, and force the Delians to deal with internal squabbles between their members. So definitely some areas where some political shenanigans could take place to take advantage of these pre-existing rivalries. But Eritrea is probably the second strongest of the Euboean city-states. The third strongest is probably Charistos, which is kind of a rising power in this period over here on the Cape. But then you've also got the strategic control of this crossing held by the city-state of Styra, and the spacious but kind of backwater city-state of Oreos. They have their city up here, and they also control the city mentioned in the Iliad called Dion down here. So that's the situation with Euboea. Not a particularly powerful region for the Delian League, but it is fully Delian aligned, and as we're going to see as I continue working on this map, Athenae actually looks weaker than they are because many of their members are small nations in kind of the frontiers. Euboea is one of the few kind of quote-unquote mainland Greek, although it's not even on the mainland, it's an island, but it's one of the few kind of continental mainland Greek regions that's entirely and staunchly pro-Delian. So if you're playing as Athenae, don't neglect your friends over there on the island. Make sure you continue supporting them, protect them with your navies, and don't let the Boeotians cross over and raise all their towns, because these folks are going to be helpful for your league in a big way. That's the situation with the region of Euboea. Now let's talk about the region of Aragolis down here, south of Isthmos. Aragolis is really defined by the city-state of Argos, who has their capital here, and then their port city is Temenian. Now, Argos is in a pretty interesting situation when the war begins, at the point the mod begins in the timeline, because Argos is neutral. They are not in the war on either side. They are Delian leaning, but they aren't in the Delian League when the war begins. And so Atagos starts this whole mod off not in the conflict directly. Now, what I envision for the Atagos sort of player experience is sort of a set of maybe missions or decisions or events where your neutrality needs to be maintained with cost, or you can sort of succumb to the pressure to join one side or the other with different bonuses and downsides for whichever faction you don't side with. And perhaps there's pressure coming from the Peloponnesians because of Atagos's location really close to the Peloponnesian core territory, and there's pressure from the Delians because Atagos has one of the sort of larger navies for a non-aligned nation, and the Delians want to add their naval strength and their land strength, again, their closeness to the Peloponnesian heartland. And just in general, if you take a look at the sort of map here, Atagos is at this important kind of crossroads between the Peloponnese and the northern areas. So obviously Corinthos is at the more direct, literal choke point. And if you're playing as Corinthos, your power over everybody because of your control of this choke point is pretty extreme. But playing as Atagos, because remember, Corinthos starts off the mod already pretty staunchly Peloponnesian aligned. Corinthos is a very deep rival of Athena, so they're not likely to join the Delian League on their own. But Atagos is unaligned. They are neutral, and I've given them this kind of white color scheme to help illustrate this. They could swing either way, and ultimately, if you're playing as either Athena or as the hegemon of the Peloponnesian League, Lacedaemon, who I'll talk about in just a second here, it's going to be in your interest to basically pour political power into trying to sway Atagos to join your league, because Atagos joining the Delian League gives the Delians not only another army and navy to work with, but a port very close to Laconia, and a kind of land connection that bypasses the chokehold at Corinthos. If you're playing as the Peloponnesians, bringing Atagos over removes that from something that the Delians can get, and also gives you another navy and an army, and just strengthens your control over the Peloponnese area. So definitely Atagos is a very interesting, very diplomatic campaign to play as. Now, they're sharing the Atagolis region with some other tags. We've got the tag of Thearea over here. Now, Thearea is pretty interesting and something that may be a bit controversial, as this is something where it's not even really in dispute. I'm just making a change to the real history for the purpose of having an interesting campaign option, which I think most people will understand is a reasonable trade-off. But basically what's going on here is that Thearea has a connection with the city-state of Aegina. Now, what's going on here is that in real history, 1 year into the war, after it began, in the winter of 431, Athenae, who was an ancient rival of Aegina, right, because they sort of compete for naval power over here, they basically showed up on the island and brutally sacked it, and basically sent all the Aeginians running for their lives and replaced their town with an Athenian cleruchy, or a colony. So in the game, I've chosen to have this event happen before the game begins, in sort of the alt history of this scenario. Aegina, the tag, is this colony that's been set up. It's got this sort of turtle icon, which was on the coin of the Aeginian coinage from this period. That's why I've been going with the turtle design. But it's got the Athenian color scheme to show that this is a Delian colony situation. Now, the refugees from Aegina fled to the Peloponnese, where they were resettled by the Spartans in this area over here, Kainoria, and they set up in the city of Thyrea. So the Thyrea tag has a white, ghostly, dead turtle design on a blood red background, and basically Thyrea is this kind of refugee state created by the Aeginian refugees. And if you wanted to play as Thyrea, you'd have your own special sort of mission tree or event or decision where your goal is to get revenge on Athenae and to reclaim your island home of Aegina from the Athenian usurpers. And this could be a really fun experience where, with the support of the sympathetic Lacedaemonians, you view the Peloponnesian War as your time to get revenge on these people that destroyed your homeland and retake your island, right? And that can be your goal as Thyrea. And so Thyrea, who does border, neutral Atagos, is a very staunch pro-Peloponnesian tag because of this recent history. Again, in real history, this event happened right after the war started, but otherwise there wouldn't really be any tag to put here because we don't know about any, or I don't think we know of any history from before this happened about who would live here. So I've just decided, I'm making an executive decision to have this kind of resettling of the Aeginians happen just before the war begins in this version of the timeline, so that you have an interesting kind of narrative experience if you want to play as this kind of revenge arc from these Aeginians to retake Aegina. And Aegina being Athenian aligned also is better for balance purposes and makes sense with it being a colony, because it's sharing the Nicaea Soronikos province that's in Isthmos, which again, remember, this is a section of the otherwise fully Peloponnesian aligned Isthmos region that is Delian aligned, because the rest of it's held over on Salamis by Athena directly. This is a Delian ally, so you get the idea. So that's what's going on with Thyrea. I understand that some people won't like to see any deviation from the history that we know, but I think making a kind of compromise for the sake of an interesting narrative that's available to a player to play a Theraean, or for that matter, an Aeginian campaign, because Aegina will have their own mission tree based on trying to kind of become the new Aegina and be a good Clerucci for Athenae. So I think that can be pretty interesting for sure. But let me know in the comments if you have any feedback about that idea. I just think it's such a cool narrative idea. And honestly, like, there's an old saying that the best historical fiction is just directly telling you what happened, because real history is so complicated and so interesting compared to what people come up with as stories. And this is some really good real historical storytelling that you could live out in this mod. So I wanted to include that as an option. Lastly, in Argolis, we've got the 3 peninsular city-states, Hermion, Troezen, and Epikaros. I've had to shift around where they are exactly because of the Bronze Age Reborn map having preset port locations, and all 3 of these nations should have ports, so I've had to squish them together a bit, but I'm sure that's okay by most people. And ultimately, all 3 of these are Peloponnesian League members because of their fear of Athenian naval power, as historically was recorded. But that's the situation with all 3 of them. That's the overall Argolis situation. And then in terms of the provinces, in terms of what Argolis controls, we've got the Asti Argolis with their capital inland here, their port city of Timenian. We've got the Asti Mycenae with their city of Mycenae, and the Asti Cleonae with their city of Cleonae. Over here, all 3 of these tags have their own little region: Hermionis, Troezenia, and Epiduaria, which are all historically known names from the ancient Greek. And then finally, we've got Vorea Cainoria, which is where Thyrea is located. This means northern Cainoria. Cainoria is the name for this area that was granted to these refugees. The southern section, Notia Cainoria, is actually in the Laconia region. Speaking of which, let's talk about Laconia. So, you may be wondering, you may have noticed this already, that I've named the Spartan tag Lacedaemon, not Sparta. And this is a pretty, perhaps controversial decision because the name Sparta is so iconic for this nation. However, in my quest for trying to achieve historical accuracy, I know I've just explained how I've compromised on this nation existing over here, but for the purpose of having at least as best as possible to still have a good experience, historical accuracy, I've had to make a decision on how to approach the naming of Sparta, because Sparta, or Sparti in Greek, was a name used by this nation, and especially by the city and by the region around the city, but they were also in antiquity known by their contemporaries as Lacedaemonians, and their city was called Lacedaemon. So what to do here? And ultimately, looking at the situation, what I've decided to do is name the nation and the city Lacedaemon, but then the region of the city, the capital region of this nation, is called Sparti. And that, I think, is the best compromise. That's the most sort of in line with my understanding of the historical way things were named. Now, having Sparta in this mod be called Lacedaemon may be a little off-putting, and it's not going to be the most accessible thing. But what I care about in this project isn't flat accessibility. I'm not making a product that I'm selling in a store that needs to be accessible to normies that don't care about history. This is a project that I really want to appeal to people like me that love the history and love the complexity and love the Greekness of it, right? Everything has the ancient Greek naming. Everything has the, as best as I can accomplish, the naming and kind of the presentation of that period. And as far as I can tell, Lacedaemon is a more accurate name for this nation than Sparta, even if calling them the Spartans isn't technically wrong. It's like saying, is the name Athena or Athenae more correct for this nation over here? Technically, they're both right, we're just, names are subjective. Names are just what we give to something. But they would have called themselves Athenae, and so that's what I call them in the mod. And as far as I can tell from my research, these folks would have called themselves Lacedaemonians. So that's what I'm going to call them in the mod as well. So that's my decision with that. I hope that that's understandable. I know this may be controversial to some folks who are excited to see like a more normal looking version of the Sparta tag, but that's the way I've chosen to approach it. Let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts about that. Now, as for the way I've actually arranged the Laconia region, it is true to history entirely controlled by Lacedaemon. I have given them a bit more territory than they probably had at the time over in what would have been Messenian territory, just for balance purposes to give them a full loop around their mountain. So the historically Messenian city of Calamae I've made a Lacedaemon city. At the start of the 431 BCE start date, Lacedaemon and Messenia are allies in the Peloponnesian League, so this border change doesn't really make the Messenia campaign impossible now or anything like that. So again, making some historical compromises for gameplay and for opportunity, while still trying to adhere to the accuracy of the naming and whatnot when I can. So again, I'm not trying to make the exact one-to-one historical experience here, but more so authenticity more than accuracy is what matters. And having the names be right and having everything be accented correctly to me is really important for that immersion. So again, I hope that my kind of lines there are understandable. But either way, in the Laconia region, we've got a couple provinces. We've got the capital province of Sparti, which is a dense urban network of different sort of connected cities. Obviously, their capital is Lacedaemon, and then the neighboring sort of satellite cities of Kinosora, Pitana, Limnae, and Messoa, with the, not technically as close, but on this map it's close by, the city of Amyclae as well. And then it's protected by this mountain pass through Salacia, which is historically documented. And then further south, we've got the port of Lacedaemon, which is Gideon. It's the main city down here in the Evrotas province. Over here along the coastline, we've got the Mani province with its capital at Hippola, and this Messenian city, Calamae, as well. And then over here, we've got the Nutia Kenoria, so the southern Kenoria province that I noted earlier. Its capital is the very important fortress city of Prasiae, and they've also got the city of Garanthrai, another fortress city as well, further inland. Then we've got the peninsula of Leucae, with its three cities, Epicaros, Limera, which, as you may imagine, was actually originally settled by people from Epicaros, hence the same name. We've got the city of Asopos and the city of Etias. Then lastly, we've got the island province of Kythera with its capital at Kythera. And technically, the island of Aegilia is part of this province too. In this period, it doesn't seem like this was occupied by anybody, and it was actually probably mostly a pirate base. So I may set up a mercenary navy to live here, but there's probably not going to be any ownership of this island by any playable tags. So that's the situation with the Laconia region. So that's what I wanted to show you all in this video. Euboea, Argolis, and Laconia are all done. And I wanted to kind of show you all what I've worked on and get some feedback on the sort of decisions I've made with this. Again, I know that there may be some backlash or concern about choosing to name this tag Lacedaemon, or having the slightly ahistorical Thyreae sort of tag exist the way that it does. I think ultimately, as I've said before in my Rome HBO review videos, historical fiction, which this sort of is in a way, I mean it literally is historical fiction, the mod that I'm working on, in my mind, the needs of storytelling do have some power over just flat historical accuracy. However, at the same time, a good historical fiction storyteller knows that the most interesting and powerful stories are really just straight from the pages of history. There's no need to like create a new scenario or come up with something to make it interesting. You can make it more sort of understandable and translatable to a modern audience, but the actual events that happened in real history are usually so compelling on their own, there's no need to get creative or try to change anything. As long as you can just adapt the story to a modern audience to understand its meaning, it can still be really powerful. So in my mind, having the situation with Therea and this kind of revenge story arc that you can play out playing as them is so interesting that it's worth bending the history a bit to make this happen. Not to mention, it's not like it didn't happen. I'm not inventing something that Athenae did that didn't happen. This is pretty well documented. in general, I don't need to invent anything to show that Adenai was kind of a terrible city-state and did a lot of messed up stuff to the people around them. There's a reason why the Peloponnesian League was so against Adenai and needed Adenai specifically to lose all of its power. Adenai is arguably a pretty, at this point in time, they made some pretty dramatic and pretty kind of morally questionable decisions about the way they handled some of their neighbors and whatnot. They were kind of going crazy with power, so whatever the case, I'm not like inventing some atrocity that didn't happen in real life. This is a documented thing that happened to Aegina, but whatever the case, that's basically the update that I have to show about these 3 regions that I worked on. I'm still working away at also making little updates here and there to localization and other things for the stuff that I have worked on already. What I'm probably going to work on next is I'm going to probably switch back over to the north and work on the Phthosis region, and possibly Aetolia after that. I may also just keep working away in the Peloponnese, but there's still a lot more work to do to be sure, and this project is still quite a ways away. But as you can see, just even from this section here, the basic sort of shape of the statue, as I said earlier, is starting to really become clear as the work continues, and I already wish I could just start playing right now. I want to play as Argos, I want to have these crazy decisions and events, but I've got to make them first. I wish I could time travel to like a year in the future, or however long it's going to take, and play the game that I'm currently making here, but I can't do that, and neither can anybody else. Although if you can time travel, let me know in the comments. I'd be interested to hear about that. Whatever the case, thank you all so much for watching this dev diary. I'm going to continue working away on this project, and I'll keep updating you all both in these dev diaries and in the Discord as I do so. But either way, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.